Latin American come. Kamu?
Hi, Dr. Bila. Yes.
For over 20 years, Clinics Health Group has provided world-class healthcare to underserviced communities. With every new facility we open, quality, affordability, and excellence is what we've become synonymous with. To that end, Cullinan Wellness Hospital is the latest addition to the group and the third in our growing roster of psychiatric care services. Located in Cullinan, east of Pretoria, our state-of-the-art facility is perfectly suited to service patients as far as Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and the Northwest Province in a tranquil setting surrounded by a luscious garden and mountain views.
It's very important for us to have such facilities in our communities because previously we've ignored the psychological instability. We thought we can go on with stress or depression, and because now that we have come out as psychiatric faculty to say we can offer this kind of care, treatment and rehabilitation for people who are in need of, who needs to heal emotionally or psychologically. So these kind of facilities are important to be. I would wish that every area would have this kind of wellness facilities.
I think mental health institutions and wellness centers such as this one are important mainly because we live a very rat race type of life and struggle to see when we are truly struggling with life. And being able to come into a facility like this allows one to pause and acknowledge whatever is happening in your life that is bringing you down, pause and regain function, pause and get back onto your feet in a way that you didn't even realize you needed. There's the need to have an out of your comfort zone area that will move and shake you as much as possible to get you back into a better state of you.
No matter the treatment or duration of stay at Cullinan Wellness Hospital, our patients and their loved ones can rest assured that they will be taken care of and watched over by our team of experienced mental health nurses, psychiatrists, and clinical psychologists.
Most of the patients that we admit are voluntary patients and they come on their own. The diagnosis that we normally work around is that patients with bipolar mood disorder, major depressive disorders, as well as post-traumatic stress disorders. Some has personality disorders such as gambling.
Our hospital provides private psychiatric services that aim to help the individual experience the fullness of life. We cater for a wide range of patients, including those with depression, bipolar, post-traumatic stress disorders, anxiety disorders, sleeping difficulties, neurocognitive disorders, dementia, and psychiatric conditions, amongst others.
My approach is I use what we call cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. So basically it's helping because most of the time I've noticed that we tend to be depressed or go into mental problems because of the channeling of our thoughts. We tend to think if you are going through a difficult situation, you tend to think more negative about it than thinking positive about it and actually getting a solution. So I just help my patients to come up with solutions, and hence I use solution-focused therapy because I'm confident that they do have solutions. It's just that sometimes they're not confident to put them into action.
My approach when treating a patient goes back to the good old Batupele principles. We follow a very client-centered approach. Every case is different, and so applying Batupele principles where it's about the patient, it's about dignity, it's about ensuring that the patient's needs are met, is at the core of practice, is at the core of all intervention.
As mental health practitioners, we encourage individuals to visit our facility so we can assist them in finding routine solutions to the problems they face on a day-to-day basis.
I think from a very simple point of a non-functional mind is a non-functional human, and neglecting mental health means, in essence, neglecting a whole part of yourself that is very necessary to maintain function on a day-to-day. The more we ignore the brain and the psychology and the emotions of a person as we have been, the more we are likely to not reach to the full potential that we could.
At Clinics Cullinan Wellness Hospital, we believe mental health is the cornerstone to helping you find and lead a happy, balanced life. Visit our magnificent facility at Hospital Road, Cullinan, Pretoria East. We're open 7 days a week and are ready to receive you.
Thank you very much. And that was Cullinan Hospital, one of our wellness facilities that we have mentioned out there in Pretoria, in Cullinan, Pretoria East. And would gladly love you to send patients there who need medical attention or wellness attention. And so this evening we are quite excited to continue providing another session on our webinars as we welcome speakers this month. We're dedicating this month to mental wellness. And so we're kickstarting this with quite an accomplished speaker who's joining us, is Ms. Nomfundo Mogapi, who's the founder and chief executive officer of the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership. And she holds a master's in clinical psychology. And Ms. Nomfundo has over 20 years experience in the mental health, psychosocial, and violence prevention sector. She also has over 16 years experience in senior leadership and management within the sector. Previously, she worked as the executive director of the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, the head of the psychosocial intervention, and also as the director for the South African Institute for Trauma Stress. She's quite a wide range of experience. At some stage, I was saying to her that the country needs to hear from her for the general healing of the total population from the trauma that we've all survived, went through in our transition into democracy. And I think in this time of GBV, she's also quite an important person. And so this evening, the topic is healthcare in the wounded context, strategies for practitioners. I think sometimes we as practitioners go through difficulties, and so we need to get strategies and tools for how to manage ourselves as we go through trauma because as the healthcare providers. And she has a passion for providing an understanding that psychosocial healing of leaders, institutions, and collectives. She has used this to contribute in shaping policies and programs such as the African Union Transitional Justice Policy and others. And so we're quite excited to welcome you, Nomfundo, this evening to talk to us. And as usual, colleagues, we request that you mute your mics and you mute yourselves, audios, and also switch off your videos. And we'll then have a presentation about 45 minutes. And after that, we'll then have a Q&A. Ms. Mogapi will be able to take your questions. And welcome, it's a pleasure to welcome you this evening. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Ray Bila, and good evening to everyone that is here. It's really an honor for me to be here. And I think just the previous presentation and some of the things that people were saying in the video touches to some of what I want to talk about. And it's interesting that most of the time when we are talking about taking care of ourselves, we tend to talk about patients. So I would like to invite you today as a practitioner that you give yourself permission to not think about this as related to other people, but to really think about yourself and how you can be able to navigate the trauma context. And I'm just going to share my presentation. So as Dr. Bila said, by training, I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've been working in the field of trauma for the past 20 years. And last year, I took a bold step of starting my own organization called the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership. This was even before COVID could fully hit. I decided that this is the work that I had wanted to do already in 2019. I had told my bosses, in December 2019, I said to them, I'm going to be leaving because this work is important to be done. And the reason for that is that in my work as a clinical psychologist, I was faced with this paradox that I see in our society. And the paradox was that despite the investment, even in development, but also in healthcare, you cannot fail. South Africa has tried to change policies, laws, trained people. I'm sure if I come to some of your organizations, you've got great systems to do the work. But what we have been faced with is this paradox where despite increased investment, we are not seeing returns. The staff are burnt out, the patients are complaining. And as somebody who specializes and works in this field of trauma, and I now also call it wounding, one of the things that I've seen is that as a country, one of our biggest downfall is that we have not fully appreciated the nature and the extent of trauma in communities and in the work that we actually do. So you'll see that my work is about not just you as a practitioner dealing with your own trauma and the impact that it has on you, but it is also about understanding that you are called to heal people and do work in a context that is highly traumatic in and of itself. And I don't think we focus sufficiently enough with giving practitioners skills on saying, how do I personally navigate this context? So when COVID hit, I remember I just had a knot in my stomach. And for 10 days, all I did was just to walk around my house. And I was like, this is gonna hit us as a country much deeper than most of us can appreciate, because we were already a country that was in denial, especially those of us that are professionals and are doing the work. It's much easier for us to refer other people for help. But one of our biggest work is that the people that are professionals, that are leaders, whether in healthcare system or other areas in our country, struggle to look within themselves and deal with themselves. So my biggest issue when COVID hit was like, this is gonna hit South Africa at a deep psychological level. And I hope that we will have the capacity to come back as a country, and that we're not gonna do what we did when we were transitioning from apartheid to a new democracy by taking our wounds and putting them under the carpet, or thinking it's only the patients that actually need the help. So that is why I ended up doing the work. So last year when Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce released a book, some of you may already have heard that book that says What Happened to You. For me, it just confirmed the very reason why I decided to start the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership. And what they said in their book was that the reason why we are not able to solve most of our problems, including, problems of organizational culture, how teams can work together, how we can be more effective in our work, was because we were asking the wrong questions. And that perhaps the questions we need to ask is not why are we doing this, but is what happened to us. So they take everything that we've learned about trauma in the past 20 years. As you all know, trauma is one of the youngest fields within psychology. But they've taken that and said, what does this research mean, not just for us individually, but for systems, for processes, for collectives? So it's a really good read for you to be able to look at. So what I'm really hoping to do today is just to say that, how can we begin to appreciate why trauma, if by the time I'm finished, you could have been able to appreciate that we can no longer afford to neglect the importance of the context of trauma in the work that we do. And I'm hoping that I can also highlight how that has an impact on the workplace and the work climate, and how we can begin to navigate and create those shifts. And those of you that are in leadership or influential position to also speak a bit about the role that leaders can be able to play. So that is what I'm hoping that we can be able to do in the next few hours. I'm trying to see a few minutes that we have together. Now, for most of you, this is a revision, but I really want to remind us about what we know about the brain, especially when it relates to trauma, because this is the reason why this work is so important. The hierarchy of the brain, I think you all know it, and you all know that what we know is that for us to be effective as practitioners, for us to be effective as leaders, but this even applies in our own relationships, we need to have activated cerebral cortex. So when we are saying that we're going to the workplace and we're doing the work, when we say we want to work as teams, when we say we want to have a healthy families and relationships, we are saying that we want to have active cortexes. Since you guys are healthcare practitioners, usually when I train, I go into details to describe the structure of the brain. I think you guys already know it, but this is just a reminder that one of why the work is so important is because in South Africa, unfortunately, this is the part of the brain, the cerebral cortex, which should be active, is the one that gets affected by the trauma. And when the cerebral cortex is not functioning as it should be, it affects everything. So you all know about the limbic system and how it actually works, that it is the part of the brain that stores our memory, that stores our emotions and the memories that are linked to our emotions. And that the amygdala is that part of the brain that is linked to trauma. When we experience painful and traumatic experiences, not just because some people, when I talk about trauma, they will say, but you know, when I think of trauma, I think maybe of rape, I think of war. If I haven't gone through that, so I haven't experienced it. But what we are learning is that anything that might have threatened you at various levels, right? Not just threatened your life, threatened your integrity, your sense of self-worth, that have threatened your sense of stability, also has an impact and gets stored in the amygdala. So we all know that. And the reason why this work is so important, and as a reminder to ourselves, is this whole concept of triggering within trauma. So what we all know is that if we don't deal with trauma, if we don't deal with the painful experiences that we have had, they get stored in the amygdala, and anything, whether it is what we see, just what we smell, even if you are failed by authority and you have a new leader who speaks in a way that you feel is disrespectful, that can be a threat that triggers your amygdala. And now what we all know is that the thing that the amygdala knows, because it is about survival, is fight. So when you find that in the organization is stuck, or the practice is stuck because people are just always fighting with each other, it could be possible that they have an activated amygdala. So that all the amygdala can do is the fight, freeze. And I have seen this happening with more and more practitioners saying, but I know my work and I know how to do it. But sometimes I just feel like I am stuck. I'm not even able to move or to flight, completely denying problems, denying that things are there. So I think the important thing and why we are doing this work, but also why this work is important, not just for our clients, but also for us, is the understanding that when we get reminded, when there are reminders of our trauma, then we get triggered And here's the core thing, is that our cortex, cerebral cortex, gets deactivated. When our amygdala has been activated, the cortex gets deactivated. And therein lies the core of the work. Can you imagine that as practitioners, when we constantly have not dealt with our own traumas and our amygdalas get activated and we are operating from deactivated cortexes, the number of mistakes that we are likely to make in our practice, the number of people, I've had people from the work, I've had an opportunity to work within the health systems where you find that the doctors are complaining because the head of the unit is not treating them well. And then the nurses are complaining because of the doctors. That is then what happens, that when our amygdalas have been activated and our cerebral cortex have been deactivated, we operate from the space where we are interacting in anger or in denial, and it could sabotage the work that we would like to do. So I would really like us just to, again, my invitation is that we might know some of this stuff, but the tendencies as practitioners is that we see it as other people. But today, I would like you to permission yourself to say, it begins with me. I can no longer encourage everyone to do this. And we know from COVID that the people in the healthcare sector are the ones that have been affected the most. So I would really like you to just think a bit more about yourself currently in your life, in present, and the work that you're doing. What are some of your core triggers currently for yourself, but also for your department or team or unit, whatever you are responsible for? And I'm just gonna allow us to give you a few minutes wherever you are to just reflect a bit on what are some of your core triggers currently. What are those things in your life that deactivate your cerebral cortex and activate your amygdala, and therefore have an impact on your functioning? So I'll just allow us for 2 minutes to do that. Even if it's difficult, I really encourage you to just try and do it. I know that the most difficult thing for us to do is to look within, but that's the most important work if we are to survive the era that we are in. So I'll just like you to sit and observe and just be aware. Because of time, we're not gonna come and discuss these in details, but I would just like you to sit with whatever you've written there and just be aware of it. So now what I want to talk about is what we are learning from the trauma field and why this work is even more important. You can imagine that when I usually do my work, I ask people to do their rivers of life and tell the story of their life from, our traumatization starts even before we are born, some of us, the relationship that our parents had with each other, 0 to 3, the status of our mothers, mental health, to how we grow up, to our relationship up until now. All of those things might have memories that are stored in our amygdala. And you can imagine then that if you are working with as 5 people, all of those 5 people are likely to bring in their traumatization. I think that somebody, Manganamisa, are you saying something? Oh, okay. So one of the things that we are learning in the trauma field and why this work is so important is that this traumatization is not just at a personal level, but it also happens at a collective level. So one of the things when I started getting into leadership in South Africa that used to shock me was that even though I could get well and engage with people at a one-on-one, and we get along with each other, when we met together as a group or as a team, something would just shift. There would be another level of conflict that was bigger than just us as the individuals. And when I landed into this concept, by the way, I mean, the concept of collective trauma is still very new, but it's beginning to build momentum after 2011. And now after COVID-19, there is this appreciation that we have all been collectively traumatized, and that collectives can have a psyche of their own that shape how they respond to things that is separate just from the sum of the individuals in that context. But what this means, and this is so critical for practitioners, because you are working in a society that has got high levels of collective trauma. In a society where I've had people who say, you know, I don't sleep, I work so hard, but at times I feel like I'm being personally attacked because the people are too broken to can even see how hard I work for them. We've had stories of patients attacking doctors because of this level of traumatization. So again, I would like you to reflect on how this shows up in your own work, in your own department, your own hospital. What is the collective psyche of your hospital? Is there things that have happened in the hospital that could be traumas and that could have an impact on how you interact with each other? What we know is also that trauma can be historical. Now, when I usually am doing this presentation with people face to face, I would always ask them and say, you know, remember when we used to be taught history? I don't know how many of you did history, because you did, I'm sure most of you did sciences. We would be asked, you know, we need to know when did Jan van Riebeeck land in South Africa? And if you got that, then you were a tick. Like, yes, you got it. But I usually say that what the thing that we were not taught, and we can't backwards, can you imagine from 1653 to now, we're talking about close to 350 something years. The story that we were not told was that was the beginning of the traumatization of our country, the beginning of people being told that you are less than, the beginning of traumatization about self-worth, about value, about who we are, from both sides, you know, from all sides of our society. Now, the thing that we are learning and now we are knowing from epigenetics is that trauma can actually change and impact our genetic makeup. And for me, this is so relevant for you as health practitioners, because you are thrown in to work in a society where sometimes the very people that you are trying to help deep within, they hold this deep-seated historical trauma. They don't even know why they are so angry with you. Some of you might have been recipients of rage that you don't fully understand. But you yourself might also be carrying that historical trauma. I mean, I have seen a lot of health practitioners who, the reason they were able to get into the health sciences is because they are intelligent by nature. They were seen as the cream of the crop, but then their self-worth, according to society, was around their education and their intelligence. And therefore, there's so much pressure on them where their work defines their value and it becomes a burden for them. And there's this historical trauma, this burden of saying, I have to do well, I have to function well. Otherwise, if I do not, it's not just only my trauma that I carry, but also I carry the burden of everyone else. So then the work has this added burden on it that I have to be able to function because my job is the very thing that defines me. There are some people I've worked with, health practitioners, who say that, you know, when I grew up, I was the favorite in my family because of my intelligence. And therefore the feeling is like outside and therefore the sense was that my worth is linked to my intelligence. So when I fail, when I don't succeed, then who am I? You know, what is the definition of who I am? Again, this is really an invitation for you to look into yourself and to look into what are some of the historical traumas that you carry personally, but also that the people that you work with also carry. And what we also know is that trauma will be transferred to the next generation. There are some of us that are fighting battles that are not even ours. And that is an added burden to the work that we actually do. One of the things that I started doing in my life is to know myself and my history, the history of my ethnic group, and like what are some of the burdens that have been passed to me by previous generations that are shaping the relationship that I have with myself, that I have with my work. I have seen people who burn themselves out, who neglect themselves in doing their work, because there is something else beyond just helping people that is pushing the work that they do. But also finally, and that is why the work that I do is also about helping organizations to transform organizational climates. Because what we are learning is that trauma can be embedded within structures. So we know that the healthcare system has got a history of how it had neglected, for example, the poor. Certain people were allowed to have more access, others didn't. But even within the healthcare system, people were treated differently as practitioners, depending on the color of their skin, but also the hierarchy of, are you a senior or a junior? And all those power dynamics have been embedded within the structures of the systems. And most people that I've worked with have said, I love my work, I love what I do. But I really find that the systems that we have to do, whether it's performance management systems, HR system, admin systems, if we don't understand that these systems need transformation, they themselves can actually perpetuate trauma. So this is the reason why it's so important for us to be able to do this work. So I can see that there is just a comment before we move to another feedback. There's somebody who has put in comment on their reflection who said that, some of their triggers is work overload, angry patients. And I want to talk about this work overload because I'm really seeing a trend around the emerging professionals in South Africa who just don't know how to pause. Unfortunately, the previous generations, and also because our parents are the ones who should have role modeled to us how to take care of ourselves, but they were too busy with survival to do that. And we are the generation that should role model differently, but we don't know. I've seen people who have work overload, who cannot pause. We are a society that doesn't know how to do that. Even though theoretically, I'm sure some of you understand the impact of trauma and stress theoretically, but deep within us, it hasn't landed because it's almost like we have to go against ourselves. We have to create new neurological pathways to begin to understand that I am the most important person to do my work, that my work is not just the output, but it's also what I give myself. So thank you about acknowledging the overload. Angry patients. And as I said, that most people will say that I don't understand how I sacrifice my life for these people, but they are the very ones who attack me. And if you understand that you are operating in a wounded society, you are then able to, first of all, not personalize the attacks as difficult as it is, to be able to know it is not about me, it is about where they come from and the trauma that they have and the history that they have with the healthcare system. I might come in being someone who really wants to do her best or his best, but because of where these people come from and how they've been failed in the past and what I represent. And I want to explain this because when I talk about this onslaught, it is visceral, it is in our bodies. When we're saying angry patients, it's not just only that they are angry, they come from the space of deep trauma. So you feel that energy, that historical energy of having been failed for centuries. And some of you might be wondering, Nomfundo, I know it's difficult to be a professional, but it has become painful. And I just hope that you can begin to have a language to understand what is happening to you and why taking care of yourself is no longer a luxury or a necessity. I think it is the next step. Practitioners can take care of themselves. Unfortunately, what I am seeing concerns me about where we are likely to go, because we are losing passionate, caring, supportive healthcare practitioners because it's too painful to work in a wounded context. So thank you for sharing that. The relationship with relatives and society and expectations, conflict with colleagues, right? Because we all brings our traumas, we are tired, we are exhausted, we are attacked by the world outside. What is likely to happen then is that we are likely to be triggered ourselves and operate from a triggered space. So conflict is likely to be increased. And I am saying this and I am painting this picture because what I am hoping is that by the time I leave here, you can say, you know what, I need to go and ask for help and take care of myself because the way I am operating in this context is not sustainable. And then also just being in a society that has no appreciation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Matilda, for sharing that with us. It just helped to crystallize what I was putting here. So what I would just like us to, so I don't even begin to know how to start looking at this and to begin to describe what COVID-19 has done to our country and the level of traumatization, the level of toxicity that it has brought. I have been working with South African organizations even before COVID. But after COVID, toxicity from heads of departments to senior leaders, to middle leaders, to registrars, I think the healthcare system, unfortunately, have been the foot soldiers. So it has been exacerbated within the healthcare system. And I think as a society, we have not paused and fully understood the things you have seen, the things you have experienced. There is this program in Netflix that is called The Good Doctor. I don't know if some of you know it. I mean, I had been watching it, and the new season has come now, and I was watching it. I couldn't go beyond the first season because they were telling the experiences of COVID-19, you know, from the perspective of doctors. And just, I had a strong emotional reaction. I was so overwhelmed because I was like, oh my gosh, I can imagine the emotional overload that the people in the healthcare system have gone through, the untold stories that they have not been able to do. We need a collective pausing and grieving, the arrested grief. All of this mean that the brain of South Africa is arrested. And unfortunately, the very people that we need to heal this country are too broken. And what is happening is that most health practitioners are on autopilot. They're like, Nomfundo, there's no opportunity to pause. I cannot pause. I'm just going on. And I'm just on autopilot, but angekho right. And unfortunately, we're going to see most of health practitioners crash if they don't take care of themselves. And I'm saying this because I'm appealing to you that because our society is too broken to see you, our society is too broken to see your pain and to see your struggle, it's going to be up to you to ensure that you protect yourself. Because if you don't take care of yourself, the people that will suffer the most are the people that you love. So what we know is that COVID-19 has created an added layer, has exacerbated the problems that have already existed, and has created a collective trauma that is even indescribable, unspeakable in our society. And we haven't even begun to deal with it. So I think I would ask you when you, I'm trying to look at our time and see if we just, I think it's important that we just sit and pause a bit. And I would like you to just maybe again, just spend a few minutes. And thank you, Matilda. And if you do feel you want to share, please do share on chat. But if you just want to do it for yourself, and that too is okay. But if you can just identify in your context and in the context that you are in, what are the types of traumas that you are dealing with? What are your own personal traumas? What are the collective traumas in your institution? And collective traumas within the healthcare system in South Africa collectively, or within the communities you work in? What is the transgenerational and historical trauma? Sorry, historical, not historical trauma. And also any structural traumas that you are having to deal with. So maybe for a few minutes, you can just sit and reflect on that. And if you want to share it on chat, please feel free. Nosipo, you can speak, please. Nosipo, I can see your hand. You can unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I
There's
can.
been technical glitches here. I'm also highlighting what was happening in the collective trauma as far as COVID is concerned. You know, the way the communities were rushed to bury their loved ones. There's rituals that we usually do, which were just totally shut down. You know, there were moments I would sit with an individual who would say, the thought of burying my mother naked, because we did not even get an opportunity to dress that, you know, your late parent, bringing that forth around the cultural.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah. I mean, you know, South Africans are just, we're not good at grieving. We have excellent rituals that begin to help us in the journey just before COVID. But after, sorry, not just before COVID, just before the burial. But after the burial, we just don't know. We don't grieve as a society. But COVID-19, and you are right, just the stories that we have been able to hear of the things that we've known to hold us for centuries were taken away. I mean, I know that my uncle passed of COVID, and the cry, my aunt's cry was, my husband couldn't come into my house. And because she was connected to people, they came a bit to the gate and she was crying. And she said, why can't he come to the house? I couldn't see him. I don't think we have appreciated the impact it has had in the society at large. But guys, the trauma of COVID, the heart of it, the knot of it is in the healthcare system. And I don't think we've appreciated that. So thank you for articulating that. I can see Mangani saying that at a personal level, broken relationships. Guys, you know, post-COVID, there has been an exponential increase of divorce in South Africa. And one of the key symptoms of trauma, because nothing tests and triggers you like an intimate relationship. And the core of trauma is disconnection. So definitely you can see the symptoms of traumatization when your relationships become broken, because when you are traumatized, you disconnect from yourself, and therefore the people around you also then tend to disconnect. So thank you for sharing that, Bongani, and just allowing us to name that as a key impact. Broken intimate relationship, broken relationships with children, with family members. Jay Bukoba says, thanks. Can you kindly comment on the concept of, yes, long COVID in the context of mental health and whatever, sorry, and whether there are specific psychiatric diagnoses like depression or PTSD that can be purely attributed to COVID-19. So thank you very much for that. And I think you can even just go and look, because there's more work, especially in Europe, because the trauma started with them to look at the impact of COVID-19 in mental health. And there are people within trauma who are beginning to say that COVID-19 can be considered as a traumatic experience, starting from the diagnosis when people learn that they've actually have had COVID, and then exacerbated by the isolation that people have. It hasn't yet fully entered the territory. I mean, you know how the healthcare people are very particular about what goes to the official diagnosis. So it hasn't yet been accepted as a PTSD diagnosis, but definitely people in the sector are pushing for it to be looked at as that. Definitely those that work in collective trauma have called it a collective trauma within the field. But another thing that we've actually learned is that most people, because of the isolation that they have had what we call PTSD. There wasn't a term, oh, why am I forgetting it, that linked specifically to practitioners. It was a term that was linked to secondary traumatization, but it was linked to this trauma of practitioners who haven't had a chance to even grieve, but had to continue to do the work. Sorry, if I get it, I'll forward it to Dr. Ray. So there's definitely work that is happening to identify the impact of COVID. on mental health. Let me just see other questions. Matilda is saying COVID and having to bury a loved one that you have facially said goodbye to, the loss of the loved. Oh, yeah, sure. So one of the things around grief that we are seeing with COVID, interestingly, we have been saying that the kind of grief related to COVID has been linked to acute traumatization. And a lot of people talking about that trauma of losing. It's not just because, remember, when you're dealing with grief, but also there's complicated grief as a result of how you've lost people. So there's also argument within the people in trauma to say that the kind of loss that is linked to COVID-19 can be linked to acute trauma. So this is exactly what we are talking about. The loss of the beloved colleagues, the foot soldiers. I think we really have to go to World War II and study what it has meant for people to lose soldiers in order for us to understand what has happened to the healthcare practitioners. Having not had a chance to say goodbye and see people. A lot of people talk about the trauma, just that complete lack of closure. So thank you for those that are sharing. Please just keep on putting it up so that we can share about it. And I also just invite you, share what is comfortable, because I really am aware that most of these traumas are still very raw. So if as I talk, you realize that it raises a lot of stuff for you, I am asking you that you try and reach out to someone, or after this, just do something to take care of yourself, because I'm trying to raise awareness and put a spotlight, or so to say, a torch to things that we would prefer to put in darkness, close the door, ignore them, and do our work. But I don't think we've got that luxury anymore. The level of toxicity that I am seeing happening in organizations and institutions is telling me that we don't have that luxury, because this trauma is just infiltrating our capacity to work. The levels of increased suicide and depression and psychiatric problems amongst healthcare practitioners is indicating to us that, unfortunately, we can no longer afford to do that. So I'm going to shift from this one, unless people just point something. And please feel free to put something on chat or raise your hand if you want to come and give an input. I really want to talk to those of you that are leaders. I won't go into too much details. I mean, my whole work, my organization is called the Center for Mental Wellness and Leadership, because people usually ask me and say, Nomfundo, where do we start? And I say that the type of leadership that we're going to have in this season in our country are either going to break our institutions further and therefore our country, or they're going to help us to rebuild and move forward. You can either have leaders that are peace carriers who have worked on themselves. I really think, and if you are a leader right now, or you have any influential position within the healthcare sector, my appeal to you is that one of your most important work, because you are going to be the vehicle that moves us forward as the society, is to work on yourself. Whether it is to getting counseling yourself or getting leadership coaching, truly understanding how you have been impacted and how your own impact is having an effect on how you show up within the organization, but also you are going to have to hold and contain broken people. And at the times when they respond to you, it might feel very personal, and it may not even be personal. It may just be because they come from a broken space. So we need influential and leadership people who will have the capacity to contain people's pain, who will also be able to contain their own pain when it has been raised, and who will be able to listen, because I'm sure there's going to be so many, and there's already so many complaints and grievances. When grievances are increased in the workplace, it is an indication that there is an increasing toxicity that is happening. But sometimes we're too broken. We haven't even created the emotional capacity to contain people. So people get shut down, their voices get suppressed, and that exacerbates the problem even more. So I'm hoping that the people in this group can invest in themselves because so they can be the peace carriers that move us away from the darkness that we have. Unfortunately, in traumatized context, if leaders don't work on themselves, they can become trauma carriers. Despite their skill, despite their experience, despite their talent. I mean, I have been seeing an increasing worrying trend in South Africa, where most people in executive position are being led by narcissistic people. There is an increase of narcissistic behavior, or you could call it narcissism. People that are outright brutal, people that scream at other people in the workplace, people that make other people feel like they are less than. And most of these are people in leadership. And I think it's leaders that also come from brokenness because of what they experience. But I don't think we fully understand the damage that we create when we as leaders say we're going to neglect our own wellness and do the work, but we bring that toxicity because we are not okay. I think that's the biggest work that needs to be done. And when you have time, we are not going to do this now because I'm hoping we can open up for some reflection. Is that in your own quiet place, I would really like you to reflect. When are the moments where you are a peace carrier currently at work, right? So I know for me, when people need to be understood and taken care of, I'm a peace carrier. It happens naturally to me. But I'm a trauma carrier when it comes to conflict because I grew up in a family that was conflictual. And my response is to ignore conflict. So when I'm a leader, I exacerbate conflict. I don't know what it might be. For you, some of you, because of your brilliance and excellence, you set very high standards on yourself, but you tend to be quite harsh on yourself, but also the people around you. So the people that surround you feel inadequate, they feel not good enough. So you might be a trauma carrier when it comes to people not performing. And it is not, and I'm not saying people shouldn't be held accountable, but when you are holding people accountable from a space of wounding, you exacerbate the problem and make them worse. So I don't know what is your area, and I would like to really reflect, like, when are you a peace carrier, and where are the places where you become a trauma carrier, where you could exacerbate it? So just before I move to the next place around the impact, can I just check if is there any questions, any reflections, anything that people would like to say? Then I will move to the next part of my presentation. Let me stop the sharing and just say. Yes.
You know, earlier on you spoke about registrars. And I know that we have within the group got people who are in academic setting, others specialists. But how do you, in the wounded context, the registrars who are being trained by senior people, in your experience, have you found that they also become victims of such behavior, and also bringing race into it sometimes?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So what I am seeing happening in South Africa is that people who are senior, and when they were trained as registered, they had experienced a lot of, I could even call it bullying, a lot of harsh treatments from their seniors. And what has happened is that they had normalized that, because if you don't question these trauma responses, they get taken as normal. And that has become part and parcel of the culture of how you train registrars. And despite the fact that people will say that it was terrible the way I was treated as a registrar, when they themselves then become seniors and enter into leadership positions or supervisory positions, they don't ask questions, right? They then automatically repeat the very same toxicity that they were in. So that is another area that definitely needs focus in terms of the training for registrars, or how people get trained within the health sector, and how that perpetuates some of the wounding that we see. Yeah. And I'll talk a bit more about transforming organizational cultures. Maybe is there just one more question before I move? I'm aware also of our time. Maybe someone that has got a comment or a question, you can even put it up on chat. Okay. We are going to move. So I won't go into details here, but what I really want to highlight is that, and what I am really trying to do is to challenge us to think of the concept of traumatization beyond just our clients needing help in one-on-one, because what we are learning in trauma is that trauma, and that's why I love Oprah's book and Dr. Bruce's book, because they are saying trauma affects everything. Everything. And I hope that that's what you can begin to appreciate. So what we know is that at an individual level, the very same human capital that we actually need to do our work is the one that becomes deteriorated by a traumatic context. If we don't consciously address trauma, we end up with a toxic work environment. I think someone already highlighted that you end up with demotivated and burnout people, poor stakeholder relationships, poor social, and here's the other thing, poor social capital. I mean, what I am seeing in my work, I have an opportunity to work with organizations and institutions, but I've also had an opportunity to work in communities. And what I am seeing in our communities as a result of COVID and the previous traumas that we didn't deal with, I don't know, I just have a knot in my stomach. People have become more angry, more frustrated. And unfortunately, I say that what happened in KZN last year from someone who works on collective trauma was not a surprise. And unless we deal with it, unfortunately, we're going to see increased events of collective violence because of the level of poor social capital, brokenness, fragmentation within our communities. But I think what's relevant for you as health practitioners, because of course, I mean, I can have a separate discussion with politicians on how they deal with this. But as health practitioners, it is just an appreciation that the people that come to you for help, they don't only bring their physical problems, they also bring this deep-seated, unspoken trauma that they hold inside of them. They don't even have a language for it. And sometimes you might end up being a recipient of that. I see there's a thing. Okay, so hi, Sissy. I see a lot of people that I also know here, so it's really good. And she's, Ketsu says, please touch on the new culture of working from, oh yes, from home, and the trauma it brings to family and how it impacts on the school performance of children. Oh yes, that's such an important one. So, I mean, when we talk about the trauma of working from home, it's at a number of levels. First of all, the key driver of traumatization is disconnection. And the key healer of traumatization is healthy connections. So what working from home has done, first of all, is that it has disconnected us from the outside world and from each other as the people that are working together. You know, we take for granted things like walking in a corridor and meeting a colleague and saying, here today, you know, my patient has died. It was really, really difficult. And then having someone that supports. But also what it has also done is that people have been forced to stay within their homes. We don't have time to talk about the level of brokenness in South African families because the core of some of our traumas come from families. So when we have our own homes, then our homes becomes the centers of triggering our previous unresolved issues from our original homes. So a lot of people were able to escape that, right, by going to work, even things that our children raised by them going to school. But a lot of people say that having to stay 24 hours with people at home, staying with the children, has raised so much things that were not resolved to the fore, but also created new forms of traumatization as children witness conflict between parents. But also for healthcare practitioners, I mean, I have a colleague of mine whose partner was the head of one of the COVID-19 institutions and department or units. And she was talking about, fortunately, they were strong enough as a couple to create a container for that. But she talks, even with them being such a strong couple, about what it has just meant. The fact that sometimes the person, if they learned that they were exposed to COVID, will have to stay away for 14 days from them. They will need to have a plan, and how that has deteriorated relationships. So yes, I mean, so there's levels of traumatization about COVID-19 that I don't think we have fully unpacked, and what that have done, it has done to us. And so I see Bongani saying the major problem that healthcare workers face is burnout syndrome. Actually, yes, I finally have the term. The term that is emerging now with healthcare practitioners is called a burn-in syndrome, where it's a syndrome that attacks the cells and it is internally. And so there's a term that is now beginning to talk about the burn-in syndrome for healthcare practitioners. How best can this be addressed, especially in the context of staff wellness programs by HR departments and facility leadership? And guys, I mean, you know, there's something that we did really well in South Africa amongst government departments and other departments, was to have this legal framework that says that if you've got more than 50 employees, you need an employment assistance program. So a lot of organizations have got EAPs or EHWPs, but, and it's a big but, the level of toxicity that even exists within those departments, and a lot of people are not using them. I have people saying, Nomfundo, I'm going to use my own money because I don't trust my own department. So there is another transformation that needs to happen within employment wellness programs. That's a separate thing with how HR departments, and I've had heads of HRs saying, Nomfundo, I'm so depleted myself because the organization does not appreciate just how broken people are. But for me, I've been saying that the work that needs to be done now is how we integrate wellness through our day-to-day work. Because currently, most people and practitioners, it takes a lot for them. It's when they've completely broken down that they will go to EAP. So how do we, from the time like when we have meetings, have check-ins and saying, how are you? You know, what is happening to you? Integrate how we treat each other as part and parcel of the work. Have processes where staff can check on themselves and be there with each other. We have to integrate it in our day-to-day work than expect people to come out of their work and go and seek for help. Unfortunately, we don't ask for help as people, but it's a call again for leadership. I think if leaders can begin to transform organizational cultures to be caring and supportive, you'll be surprised. You'll expect that the healthcare sector is the most caring sector because they know better. But unfortunately, it is the opposite. Nalit says, I think we must also bear in mind the broken dreams that democracy was supposed to have brought through. The hope of the promised land of milk and honey, my gosh. You know, so one of the things that we did when we were working with violence was that hope was one of the critical ingredients. And by the way, you know, one of the ingredients of building psychological capital, there's a whole field that talk about how you build psychological capital, and it focuses on hope as a key ingredient of building that. But when it gets broken, it even breaks the psychological capital. And in the studies around violence, they saw an interesting trend because we were trying to understand, you know, the architecture of the psychology of violence. And they said in societies where hope was depleting, violence increased, as opposed to countries where there was either no hope at all or there was hope. So definitely, this hope that gets lifted up during the elections and comes down has also fed into the traumatization collectively of our country. And let me tell you, things have gotten worse. Even racial tensions in our country have become worse because what we are going through has exacerbated the historical traumas that we have had in the past because we haven't been able to deal with them. And Nosipho says also the extreme fear that you will affect your significant other as a healthcare practitioner was really traumatizing. Definitely. The questioning of, could I have impacted people? Am I the one that could have done this? But also there was, when we used to grow up, one of the things that made the work meaningful was the respect and the love that was there for doctors, right? And we know that meaning making is also a critical component of building mental resilience. But what happened during COVID-19, people were scared of doctors and nurses. I mean, we've had instances where people were chasing nurses away because they said, no, you are bringing the disease to us, where people didn't want to be around doctors. So yes, definitely. Levels. I mean, I hope you are like COVID alone, but then there's also this added layer. So there is an appreciation that globally the healthcare sector has been affected. And actually in Europe, there's now a move on trauma-sensitive healthcare system and how it can be integrated. I don't think we've woken up to that as a country. But what makes it even worse for us is not just this global trauma of COVID, is the added unresolved traumas of historical traumas that we didn't deal with. So yes, it is a mammoth task that is ahead of us. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for sharing and putting your inputs here there. Yeah, thanks, Kolisa. Yes, stereotypes of our communities about COVID-19 and being seen as a carrier of the disease when you're the one who doesn't sleep at night, when you have to be separated from families and the very same communities you want to help are now the ones that are taken. So I do want us to just spend the next few minutes. Ray, maybe I can just talk until 20 past and then we can have 10 minutes of reflection. I just want to talk a bit more about strategies and then we can then just close us to like, what are some of the things that we can have? I think part of it is that we seriously just as a healthcare sector need to talk about trauma-sensitive healthcare that appreciates where we come from. And these are some of the books. Gina Ross has done a lot of work on the trauma vortex, where she says that the very things that you are trying to address in society, if you are not conscious and creating supportive systems, they will play themselves out within the organizations. So I think there's work that needs to be done at a leadership level. Expanding the psychological capacities of our leaders I think is the next struggle of our country. I think we need to start having trainings with leaders on understanding trauma, not just at an individual level, but at an institutional level and how it can be transformed. Getting leadership coaching and even advisory from those that specialize with trauma. I am surprised at how when we do strategies in our country, we don't bring people who help us to say, how do we do a strategic plan that considers this trauma? Can we cultivate cultures of self-care? And here's the thing. I mean, I've seen leaders who will say, no, you can take care of yourself, but they do the opposite. How do we begin to model to our practitioners that we taking care of the self and therefore taking care of ourselves as leaders, therefore permissioning them to also take care of themselves? I think there is work that needs to be done in having trauma-sensitive organizations. So one of the things that I did in my organization when I was still a leader there, we would have 5 strategic objectives. And the 5th one was on organizational development. And in there, part of it was self-care. And everyone in their performance contract had self-care. And the question when we do performance appraisal would be, what are you doing to take care of yourself? And appreciating that taking care of yourself is a critical component of your deliverable in a wounded context. So how do you begin to do check-ins with each other? To just say, Unjani, how are you? If our meetings are 1 hour, let's give 15 minutes to just saying that you matter, your mental health, your psychological state matters. We're not just gonna pretend it doesn't and move on. How do we build interpersonal relationships and connections? I've already talked about transforming some of our organizational systems so we have systems that actually care. And be very conscious of I think there is work that needs to be done to just reflect on what kind of organizational climate do we have? And if it is toxic, how do we begin to transform that? And of course, as I have said, that having trauma-sensitive workplaces has to be part and parcel of strategic prioritization. I don't think this is a luxury. What COVID has done in our country means that healthcare sector has to start prioritizing trauma-sensitive organizational development. And it is not just about telling practitioners to go to EAP. It is deeper and bigger than that. I'm not gonna look into this, but it's a very useful model, the SCAF model. It's just such a useful model around addressing interpersonal relationships. And it identifies 5 key areas that can be affected that needs to be built at an interpersonal level, which is things, a lot of traumatization happens around status issues, legitimization of people's positions, certainty. So what we know is that when people are in an uncertain environment and there's lack of certainty, it also affects the interpersonal relationship, sense of autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So all of these things are the things that can trigger people and trigger their amygdalas and deactivate their cortexes. So please just also be aware how COVID and trauma has disrupted these 5 key areas of healthy interpersonal relationships. And what are some of the things that you can begin to do in the organization to rebuild these? There's also a whole field on building psychological capital. And what we know is that you build psychological capital in the organization by igniting hope, optimism, and I know within the healthcare sector, this, for most people, the COVID-19 has eaten this away. So how do we go back and ignite this, building resilience and efficacy? This is just something interesting for younger people, but I mean, we don't have time to go through this, but it is fun that if younger people can be helped with having a stronger sense of purpose, they tend to be the ones that really struggle, especially those of you that are in senior position and are supervising young people. Studies are showing that helping young people with assertiveness, sense of purpose, being decisive, and a sense of focus actually builds their mental resilience. And finally, I just want to say that we really need to look at how we can transform our workplaces. But, you know, most of the time when I do this work, some people will say, oh, yeah, Nomfundo, sure, you need to talk to my boss. Yeah, you need to talk to my colleague. And just almost in every group, people always look at someone else that can be helped by my presentation. But I say to people that if even just one person, I mean, I know with myself, just me doing work has helped me to be much more effective in what I do and shaping what I do as a leader. If just one person invests in improving their self-awareness and working on themselves, they can play a role in shifting some of the cultures within the work that they do. Building trust is a critical component of transforming workplaces. Being consistent, being caring, being boundaried, all of these things are providing space where people can talk. I think there's some work that needs to be done around like a whole debriefing of what happened to us during COVID as the healthcare sector. I think the whole country needs a pause. I'm so impressed. There's this organization that has invited me. It's called IPASA. They fund education in South Africa. They have 2 days and their conference is pausing. They've called all their executive leaders and they said, the power of pausing. Why is it important for us to pause? And I think those organizations that are able to appreciate that what is seen as the soft issues has now become a critical component of the core issues that we want to deliver are those that can survive this era. I think we need to ask different questions of what happened to us and the training of leaders, of us as practitioners or stakeholders on trauma and how it has affected us, and borrowing from what is emerging from Europe, because fortunately they are ahead of us in dealing with trauma, and they are beginning to learn how they can transform some of their organizations to be more healthy. So in closure, I just want to say that going into the future, your institution has a choice to completely ignore trauma like we've done in the past as a country, and to take the low road of in the future, increased conflicts, toxic environments, repetition of the same thing, because that's what trauma does, it repeats. It brings repetition. You solve the same. I don't know if you've been in that context where you solve the same problem over and over, over and over, and over, and over, and over, and over, and over. Trauma does that, right? You become stuck, bent out and demotivated stuff. And of course, at the core of it, it's going to be poor service. We're going to be asking people, will be attacking doctors and practitioners, that be attacking psychologists, nurses, that be saying there's poor service. But poor service is just but a symptom of something deeper that is happening. But I'm really hoping that you are going to decide that you're going to be part of those that will take the high road in terms of the future scenario, where if we really deal with ourselves, we can have more creativity, revitalization, cohesive teams, motivated and performing staff. So these are really some of the books that you could look at if you are really interested in diving deeper into this. For me, I think the What Happened to You is the book that just captures the importance of doing this work. So, and these are just some of the materials if you are interested. But thank you very much. We can open up for questions. That's all I have for today.
Wow, thanks a lot.
So, Dr. Peter, I don't know if we can help. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'm calling Nomfundo from New Post now. Yeah, sure. It's been wonderful. It sounded like a healing hour, you know, that we pause and find this time. We hardly have these moments. And as you said, someone was saying that they wish we can have this in our organization. I have the same feeling listening to you to say, you know what, we need this also to have this discussion. Not only for this webinar, but I think in organizations. It's been wonderful, and thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and your experiences where you worked. I think you spent most of your life dealing with trauma in your workspace. We've got a few minutes. We can take a few questions, and thank you that you did handle a few questions previously. So just some people say thanks for the wonderful presentation and necessary introspection needed for all of us. Yeah, colleagues, I'm not sure if there's anyone else who still has a question that they want to post in the chat, or just unmute yourself and ask a question. Maybe just for you, yeah, if there's anyone here in organization, people working in organizations, how do they get hold of you? If you want to share that, perhaps.
Oh, yes, I'll put the details.
On the chat line, yeah.
Yes, I will. I'll also put my number.
Yeah. Yeah, once you do that, like Glenn Thompson says, the medical professionals need to, well, it just jumped now, need to be human and mortals. Yeah, because sometimes we think that we are superstars, you know, we are here to solve people's problems, heal the nation, and forget about ourselves.
There's another one. Any comments on crime, trauma, doctors? Yeah, sure. Doctors have been held up all over the country in the workplace. Yeah. Sure. I mean, I've been working with the impact of violence and violence just generally. Clyde, I can see also your question. You know, one of the key things that contributes to traumatization is feeling insecure and unsafe. And when we do trauma work and trauma healing, we try to create that sense of security and safety. So when you have to go and on a daily basis feel unsafe because you are held up, we've had instances of people being held up in their own workplaces, people breaking up in practices. But you can also imagine what that does to you as a doctor, because these people come in and they do this, and then you are expected to help them and support them. You know, you are only human. What impact does that have on you? So definitely, that's a huge trauma. I think they live on, and thank you for just bringing that into the room and highlighting it as another added level of trauma. I can see Clyde has a question.
Yeah, Clyde, go ahead, ask your question.
Thanks, Ray, and thanks, Nomfundo. You know, this is an absolute brilliant presentation. And I think as medical professionals, and me being one of the seasoned ones, I call myself a senile delinquent. I think we need to be prepared to shed that mantle, be strong. It's to be human. We were given the right to express emotion. And I think, you know, they say why tears burn down the cheeks, because they're so loaded with emotion. I just thought I'd share that one with you. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Clyde, for that. Yeah, very true. And
Actually, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say that there's a book by Brené Brown. I mean, if you are really interested, They Dare to Lead. She really speaks. She calls it, like as you're saying, the metal. She calls it the armor. That for future leaders that are going to be successful are those who are able to let go of the armor and to know that the biggest role of leaders is to learn to be vulnerable, to drop the metal and says, I am real. And here's the thing with the seasoned, as you said, the seasoned professional, you are a role model. So if you don't take care of yourself, you are recreating these toxic cultures, because the upcoming healthcare professionals are looking at you. So if you don't do the taking out of the armor for yourself, do it for other people. Do it for the next generation, because you are that role model. So thank you for bringing that and highlighting.
Yeah. That's what Telesco is saying, that about that you need authentic leaders and who are prepared to be vulnerable. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think I called John Maxwell says we must invest in ourselves, because sometimes we, as an authentic leader, a transformational leader, that's what one needs to do, to invest in yourself. And I think that's what you are. Maybe if you can just share that book that you said maybe the name of the book that we can remember that you said we should.
The book is Brené Brown.
Oh, you mentioned Brené Brown?
I'm trying to put it on chat. I don't know why it's not going. Okay, there.
Dare to Lead. Oh, yes, right.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.
There's actually, a whole course that you can do on this as a leader and really working on this. Yeah.
Okay. No, thank you very much. We don't have to overshoot the time that we have. It's been a brilliant session. Yeah, call it a solution now. I used to go to some place, they call it or healing hour. Maybe we should have this on a regular basis. Have time to pause, just to talk about things that can help us to become better human beings, better professionals. I'm going to ask Dr. John Mogapi just from Clinics, who's our group occupational health manager, to do the just closing remarks, and we end the session. John?
Thank you very much, Dr. Bila. Greetings, colleagues, and hello, Nomfundo Mogapi. Thanks for a very interesting and interactive presentation. So interactive was this presentation that we actually changed, the traditional Q&A session, slotting in questions in between, because I think it was quite informative. We even went beyond, the scheduled time. I also realized that you picked up on a few familiar names in the audience, and I'm sure my face and name will take you back to Glenn Thomas at Wits University. I hope you remember that.
Gosh, oh yes. Yeah, you know what? The healthcare sector, these are my colleagues, so yes.
Wow. Yeah, but thanks for bringing it home,
John. I didn't know that.
Thanks for bringing it home, Nomfundo, the sense that, us as practitioners, we really need to introspect. And you touched on a few interesting concepts, towards the end of your presentation, something on psychological capital and something about, transformation of the workplace into concepts like trust and self-awareness. I really felt, that, when you went into those, topics, it was at the tail end of your discussion. I wish we can take a second bite at the cherry of this interesting, discussion, and wish to thank you. So yeah, on behalf of Clinics Health Group and the management of Clinics Health Group, the executive committee, the people who lead this weekly webinars, Dr. Bila and the marketing team, we'd like to thank you, Nomfundo Mogapi, for a wonderful presentation, and thank you very much to the colleagues that have tuned in, and good night, colleagues.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.